Namaskara and welcome to BIC Talks, a podcast brought to you by Bangalore International Centre, where we present conversations that move, inform, and encourage discourse.
We've heard Philip Graham said that journalism is the first rough draft of history. And I think the civil service memoir is an important part of, it's an important genre which provides a very crucial part of the record. Informal, it may have assumptions, it may be partial, but it's a very, very critical part of the record. The civil service is privy to a lot of policy decisions, privy to a lot of historical moments, and we're always grateful when civil servants retire and pen these reflections down, and in such an articulate way as this book does. So that is the first thing.
In an illustrious career spanning over 40 years in public service and culminating in the highest office in Indian bureaucracy, Union Cabinet Secretary, K.M. Chandrasekhar has seen and done it all. He is one of those rare IAS officers who has held a wide range of senior positions in state government, the centre and public sector undertakings. In this autobiography, As Good As My Word, he paints an intimate picture of the UPA government during one of its toughest phases and his own crucial role in steering India through some of her most severe crises. The Great Recession of 2008, the oilmen strike in 2009, and the 26/11 Mumbai attacks and scams, the 2G spectrum case, and the 2010 Commonwealth Games corruption scandal. The book describes Chandrasekhar's experiments in public administration, cutting his teeth in trade diplomacy as the Indian ambassador to the World Trade Organization, his excellent working equation with Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, his run-ins with some prominent ministers of the time, and his reflections on Indian democracy, economy, and defense. In this episode of BIC Talks, K.M. Chandrasekhar is in conversation with Uma Mahadevan and Sudhir Krishnaswamy.
I know that he is, of course, the head of the best institution, legal institution that you have in the country today. And I have heard immensely about her. She is devoted to social development, to Panchayati Raj in many ways. And she also writes whenever she gets the time. We were just discussing before this meeting, and we both agreed that if you want to do a sincere job in government, you can't write while you are in government. You won't get the time. So I can't write a book like this when I am in government. But she will obviously write later on. And she has plenty of things to write from all that I've heard. So let me go on to this subject. The purpose of this, I have certain views, but it is not necessary that everybody should have the same views. If you have a different view, you can tell that view. I have no problem, and we need not enter into a debate and all. Maybe this is not the forum. We can debate on news channels, NDTV and Times Now, and above all, Arnab Mukherjee. So that we can do separately. But here, we can have different views. And my views need not necessarily be the one that you agree with. We have here some very distinguished people. Abhijit is here. He worked with me partially when I was in government, so he knows me probably better than I know myself. And Joy Woman was the Chief Secretary of Chhattisgarh when I was the Cabinet Secretary, and we dealt with each other pretty closely. As a Cabinet Secretary, I had a close relationship with Chief Secretaries. I started the practice of annual meetings of Chief Secretaries, and I made the Chief Minister give them a dinner at his house on this occasion. So that, you see, I think what is most important today is the linkage between the center and the states has to be strong. That was there in my mind even then. I used to go out with officers, with secretaries to different states, And we used to solve problems there and then. So that was the style of my work. And of course, it depends on how much time you have, because when there is a crisis after crisis, there is a problem. Now, so far as my book is concerned, I would say that there are three main segments, roughly three main segments. One, of course, is governance and the issues that could provide pointers to facilitate frank discussions between all of us here. You can also, I suppose, ask questions of Mrs. Mahadevan and Mr. Dr. Krishnamurthy. You must be Dr. Krishnamurthy. Are you Dr. Mahadevan? No. Dr. Krishnamurthy also. And I think it is important that these different perspectives, particularly now, there is a kind of intolerance of different opinions being raised. I think it's very bad for a democracy. All different opinions must come out in the open. That is how democracy has to be built, how a government has to be built. So that, I think, is very important. I came across a remark by Mr. Mohan Bhagwat. He's a chief of RSS. This was at a meeting in Ahmedabad. He said, and I quote, "One person, one thought, one group, one ideology cannot make or break a country. Good countries of the world have all kinds of thoughts. They also have all kinds of systems, and they are growing with this multitude of systems." So this is something that that I believe in, and which I have tried to encapsulate in the writing of my book also. Now, the first point that I mentioned in my book is that it is, the discussion need not be limited only to what is written in my book. Many would not have read it, even though both my colleagues on the podium, they have read it, and they will ask me some searching questions, but I have no difficulty with that. So this is a discussion. This is on experiments in public administration. That is the subject of this discussion. So whatever ideas you have, let it come out. That's what I would like out of this lecture. Now, in the first section of my book, I have talked about the civil service. I believe, there are many, now there are many options which you can enter. At that time, when I entered the service, there were not that many options. But if I'm still given a choice, I think I would again select the civil service, for the simple reason that the diversity of the work that I got, my ability to talk to the people, understand them, that I don't think I can get anywhere else. And the fact that I have to keep, one great thing about the civil service is that you've got to change very fast. I may be director of fisheries today. Tomorrow I will be dealing with milk and animal husbandry. Third day I will be dealing with police, home ministry. So you don't have much learning time. 3 months, 4 months, you have to pick up everything and you got to be in control. So that constant change is something which I enjoyed. There were many achievements during my time. The Kerala Civil Service, the non-rationing public distribution system in Kerala through the Kerala State Civil Supplies Corporation. I introduced a new cooperative setup for fisheries, which is still surviving, called Matsya Fed. And it's made a lot of change to the lives of fishermen. And then again, I have talked at length, almost 65 pages I find, on the work I did in diplomacy. That's also a change. I worked as the Deputy Chief of Mission in the Embassy of India, Brussels, servicing the European Commission, Luxembourg, Belgium. Then I was appointed ambassador to the World Trade Organization, where I worked for 3 years. And so there also, and that was, in my view, the best part of my career was when I worked in Geneva as ambassador to the World Trade Organization. And everywhere that I have worked, and I have mentioned that specifically in the book, nothing would have been possible without teamwork. So I think the civil service is, if it is to function very effectively, the teamwork part of it, I've given credit wherever it is due. If people have worked with me and they've contributed, I've given credit in my book to that. Working as a team, we can really achieve fantastic results even today. So that is one important factor that I mentioned. A few months ago, I came here to the ISRO. They were having a meeting of senior officers of ISRO. I was asked to talk about uncertainty in governance. Then only the mind starts thinking, uncertainty in governance. Because everything that you do, there is an element of uncertainty. You don't know what the result is because you don't have all the facts with you. The CAG, when he does his audit, he has all the facts with him. And it's easy for him to find out, this was wrong, that was wrong, this should have been done better. But when we do it, when we are actually in the field and trying to do things, we don't have that time. We can't waste time collecting facts because the timeliness of a decision making is far more important than waiting for all the facts and getting the perfect result, which you may still not get, because by that time the events might have overtaken you. Then I have mentioned in my book that one area in which I was disappointed. I thought I had not done as much as I should, and which has not been done in India even to this day, is to make a systemic change in government. Now, there have been a large number of committees, commissions, etc., producing volumes of reports. The last one was led by Mr. Moily. He produced 15 voluminous reports containing, I don't know how many thousand recommendations. Now, obviously, when this went to the Prime Minister, he also didn't know what to do with 15 volumes. So the simplest method is pass it on to the Cabinet Secretary and ask him to deal with it. So we used to have regular meetings, one whole afternoon looking at each recommendation. Then we would say, this is feasible, this is not feasible. That's not a good way of doing things. And the same thing has happened with all the committees and commissions. Some of them have come out with ideas. And those ideas were implemented for some time and then forgotten. But government as such, it is not going to change unless the process of government itself changes. And that is possible if you give a result orientation to the government. We need to define the results, and then the process will adjust towards achieving those results. It is not something that is new. It was tried out by Margaret Thatcher initially in UK. It was called the New Public Management. Then the Australians picked it up. New Zealand picked it up. New Zealand, I think, has done the best job here. And they have an entirely different system of result orientation. You define the results in the beginning of the year. Then you, maybe over a period of time, you keep looking at how the results have been achieved, how many results have been achieved, and then at the end of it, at the end of the day, this process of thinking differently from process to results, that will make that big difference that this country needs. I tried it out. I tried it out during my 4 years as Cabinet Secretary. We called it the result framework document. Each secretary would sit down with his officers, identify what are the results he is wants to achieve during the year. And what is the weightage you will give to each of those results. Then talk to the minister, get the minister's approval also. And then you have a system of scoring based on the actual achievements against the objectives. This worked pretty well, and it spread quite far, because after I had left government and I came to Kerala, back to Kerala, to my home state, I found that many of the offices there, including the scientific offices, they had results from framework documents, because the whole system was supposed to work pyramidally, from the secretary down to the head of department, down to the organizations. Each of them would have their results identified. And in each of them, we would be able to assess what is the actual progress that they have made during the year. Unfortunately, it failed. It failed because I left, and I was the only person to push it. Such things will never succeed unless there is political will to do it. Now, after the 2009 election, when the Congress won comfortably, the UPA won, I went to Prime Minister Manmohan Singh and I told him, this is actually a victory for you, because all the things that you've done during the last 5 years, that has been approved by the people of India. So here is a time to make a change and change the system around. So he told me, yes, I think we must do things differently now. But then nothing happened. He didn't take any interest. Meanwhile, a couple of pressmen had written an article saying the ministers are being marked by the Prime Minister. Now, this scared Mr. Manmohan Singh a great deal, Dr. Manmohan Singh. And after that, this became entirely my exercise. So when I went, it failed also. So unless you are able to change that system, there is no point in tinkering with this and that. You have to go the whole way and change the system from a process-oriented system to a result-oriented system. That way you can make the system work. So that is something where I feel that all of us, including Abhijit and Joy, Oman, all of us, and I hope the NLSIU will take up some exercise like this, because it has a lot of credibility and it can possibly really make a difference. It's not going to work, first, if there is no political ownership. It is not going to work unless it is linked to your budgeting system and to your incentive system. So if these things are put together, I wish this system which I had started had been given some more time. It would have taken, say, another 5 years to stabilize. But we would have had a completely different concept of governance. That's what I think. And the same thing with performance appraisal, the incentives attached to performance appraisals. Those are areas where I'm afraid I could not achieve the results that I wanted. I have also mentioned in my text I think, democracy, there is a big section in my book on democracy, the importance of the Indian Constitution, and what difference it has made to this country. I read a lot of Ramachandra Guha, who I believe is quite a popular person in the BIC also. He keeps coming here. Now, the Ramachandra Guha has in his text, I don't know whether I can read out the quotations if it's here. You see, he had very clearly mentioned that when the British gave us when we won independence from the British, the general view was that India is not going to survive. India is too deeply divided, too much diversity in the country, too much conflict between Hindus and Muslims, too much conflict between ethnic groups. So we are not, India may not succeed, but Pakistan has a possibility of success because there is one religion which is around which they can build. Let me see if I can get something on this. Yeah, here. Now, this is a book, India After Gandhi. He says that in 1891, when Rudyard Kipling visited Australia, a journalist asked him about the possibilities of self-governance in India. He said, "Oh no, they are 4,000 years old out there, much too old to learn that business. Law and order is what they want, and we are there to give it to them straight, and we give it to them straight." Then he also mentions a cricketer and tea planter who predicted chaos would prevail in India if we were ever so foolish to leave the natives to run their own show. Ye gods, what a salad of confusion, of bungle, of mismanagement, and far worse would be the instant result. Themselves, they are still infants as regards governing or statesmanship, and their so-called leaders are the worst of the lot. Now, that was the impression everybody had. But democracy, the constitution, provided so much room to bring together this diversity that we are still there, and we are a powerful country, probably the most, what is it now, third biggest GDP? Fourth? Okay, fourth. So anyway, they say we are going to cross number of other countries. So it's fine, the economy will grow. Whatever the government, economy will grow because there is a whole lot of resilience in India. When we had the pandemic, the economy didn't collapse. You found that they found new avenues of production, masks, sanitizers, plenty of other things. Our people are innovative and they can achieve results, and our economy is going to go on. But we need to ensure that our political system remains intact, that it accommodates all the diversity. We cannot afford a dictatorial kind of system to develop in this country. We need the democracy. And as an officer, I say that if we leave it to officers, if there is no connection between the people and the officers, again, the system is likely to collapse. The thing is, the MLAs, many of us don't like them, and many of them are pretty bad also. But the fact is, they are the people whom the people approach. They are afraid of the officers. They wouldn't go easily to a collector's office. So that system of democracy is strong. It has to survive. And dictatorship is not something, if you really look at it, and I've read a lot about this, many dictatorships, including Hitler's Germany, including Mussolini in Italy, they started with different constitutional forms. They didn't start as an outright revolution or a putsch. Even Stalin, he worked behind Lenin, and then only he came to the front and created all that. Mao may be different. Mao, of course, led his army, and he managed that way. But The point really which I have to say is that any cult of the personality, any creation of animosity against sections of society, like anti-Semitism in Germany, Bolshevism in Mussolini's Italy, the strong revulsion against kulaks and Trotskyites in Stalin's Russia, all these, it is useful for persons with dictatorial tendencies, for a system that wants to change the democratic form of governance, to find out people to hate. Some section of society should be hated. And that is extremely dangerous for the future of India. India is far more diverse than all these countries. There are many other things that you see in an incipient dictatorship. The building of giant edifices, for example. You have the Palace of the People in Bucharest, which was built by Ceausescu. He built that kind of thing. That is another thing. And then takeover of education, culture. These are the symptoms which we need to really be careful about, so that we can create let us make India, let's be proud of India, and let this country flourish.
If I can bring Uma in,
Yeah, sure.
in a conversation. I don't want to be directive about where in the book. I'm sure there are many parts of the book that we might want to go to. But Uma, would you like to start by just sharing your overall sense of the book? Because my impression reading it was that even as far as bureaucrat memoirs go, and the last 5 years, last 10 years, we've seen a lot of them. This is a very different book. It has a different feel. It has a different approach to complicated issues in public life. But I won't say more. I will say a little bit after you, but may I first invite you to say what you felt reading the book overall, what stood out and grabbed you.
Thank you, Sudhir. And thank you for the opportunity. It's lovely to be here in this discussion. And straight away to respond to your question, Sudhir, about what's different about this civil service memoir. I was just talking to you, Mr. Chandrasekhar, before the session about how sometimes it's very interesting to read civil service memoirs, but it's not always easy to finish reading them. Some of them tend to be very much full of I, me, myself. And there are always entire stretches about when I was a collector and all of that. And the first thing about this book, which I really, really liked, was that it read, it read like a fascinating piece of long journalism about a very, very interesting part of contemporary history. They always say, so there are 4 points that I really want to make. The first is that, we've heard, Philip Graham said that journalism is the first rough draft of history. And I think the civil service memoir is an important part of, it's an important genre, which provides a very crucial part of the record. Informal, it may have assumptions, it may be partial, but it's a very, very critical part of the record. The civil service is privy to a lot of policy decisions, privy to a lot of historical moments, and we're always grateful when civil servants retire and pen these reflections down, and in such an articulate way as this book does. So that is the first thing. The second thing I wanted to say is that government is eternal. Civil servants retire, new batches come. It's like a caravan, that the caravan keeps moving, and some people get off, but others get on at the end. But this book covers 40 years, not only of your own life, Mr. Chandrasekhar, and your career, but of India's history. So roughly in 4 parts, you talk about Kerala, which is the state part of a civil servant's life, of an IS officer's life. You talk about Brussels and the WTO. And that's really important. And as you've said, that's in some ways for you the high point of your career. It also brings out what a civil servant can do with a lot of hard work, planning on how to negotiate, how to forge alliances, as you did, India, Brazil, China, bringing South Africa, Thailand, others into the picture. And most importantly, how to speak up for others and help each other in the developing world, which I think was a tremendous contribution, especially in the area of public health and the negotiations about intellectual property rights, which enabled the whole of Africa to get affordable drugs and for India to produce them for there, which I think is a tremendous contribution. And that's the very definition of leadership. I found that very interesting. The third part about being Revenue Secretary, and in being Revenue Secretary with all these different agencies at your command, even then being able to reflect on how it's so easy to abuse the power of agencies, but how government policy must be towards the direction of preventing abuse, which I thought was a very, very candid and thoughtful reflection. And of course, as Cabinet Secretary, such a tumultuous time, such an exciting time, and historically important time for India. But the fourth section of the book, again, you return to Kerala, and there you're taking the long view of Kerala as a state, as Deputy Chairman of the Planning Board. You're talking about preparing a Kerala development plan for 2030. You're talking about building in the importance of sustainable development, the importance of health and education, and taking Scandinavian parameters, Scandinavian countries' parameters as the goal for Kerala, growth with inclusion, and not just GDP-focused growth. I thought that was very, very interesting. And particularly about the WTO days, there was my Urdu is not great, but there is a quotation from Majrooh Sultanpuri, which occurred to me, which says, and this is something that the IAS does, forge alliances. It says, "Main akela hi chala tha janib e manzil, magar log saath aate gaye aur karwa banta gaya," which I thought was very, very apposite for the way in which alliances were forged in the WTO days, and India's role in taking on the combined might of the US and Europe. The third point I quickly wanted to make was that I really appreciate the style of the book. It's not salacious. It's not tell-all. Sometimes you don't need to tell everything. You need to know what to tell. You need to be restrained, not just because discretion is the better part of valor, but you need to tell in a way that actually takes the long view and separates the grain from the chaff. As Emily Dickinson said, tell all the truth, but tell it slant. I also appreciate that there's no self-aggrandizement. As you very rightly said, government is teamwork, and there's no I in government. We always say that it's teamwork, and you can get a lot done when you don't care who gets the credit, which I think is very important. I appreciate the ways in which, with a very sharp telling anecdote, you talk about Murasoli Maran, Arun Shourie, Arun Jaitley, and Dr. Manmohan Singh, especially the moment about the paragraph when you describe how Arun Shourie, at a ministerial discussion, defends the Kenyan Chief of Mission, Amina Mohammed, at a meeting at Sharm el-Sheikh, where she was unable to speak because it was only ministers speaking. I thought that was very, very a very telling anecdote about leadership again in action. You also mention Manmohan Singh, and you write about Manmohan Singh and the 91 reforms, how channeling Victor Hugo, he talks about no power on earth can stop an idea whose time has come. This, I think, is an important part of being in the civil service, being in the IAS, because the civil service is also a contributor to nation building. And these are all nation building moments. One of the most important, and I said it's a self-effacing style, and one of the most thoughtful comments you make in the book, for me personally, is that you point out that it was the British who needed the steel frame, and that's why the Indian civil service was a steel frame for them. But for India, the IAS is not the steel frame, and the constitution has to be the steel frame. And I think that's very, very important. Younger generations need to read this, because it's not the role of the collector which is important. It's a 150-year-old edifice, and it's not the role of a collector which actually leads to contributions, personal contributions. Personal contributions are possible in every role that is there, especially the quotation from Arun Maira, which actually is, again, very, very insightful. He talks about, again, having been a corporate leader, he comes to the Planning Commission and he talks about how in government, equity is perhaps more important than efficiency. And the role of government, the purpose of government is not to make a profit, but to make life better for everyone. And the everyone plays an important role, the word everyone. I remember another quote from Arun Mahira, who also talks about how young officers need to learn not just to perform governance, but to enable it, especially after the 73rd Amendment. And the fourth point about the book is the tremendous reflection on planning, the importance of planning. You actually quote Abraham Lincoln, who says that if I have to chop down a tree, if I have 6 hours to chop down a tree, I'll spend 4 hours just sharpening my axe. And that's the importance of planning, because planning is important if you want to get outcomes. Planning is important for sustainable development. Planning is important for growth with equity, with inclusion. And most of all, in the 21st century, when we have climate change looking at us every day, staring us in the face, planning and working together, most important. The final point I wanted to make very quickly is, and you have mentioned it, a missing element in the book, and I hope you'll write another book about this, is about the IS itself. You do talk in part about the results framework document. You do talk in part about the performance management. But I wish you would dwell, perhaps in a later work, on the crisis of the IS itself. Today, the IS, and you have been the cabinet secretary, which is the head of the civil services. Today, the role of the IS in the 21st century, in a country that is growing into an important has an important international role, but within the country itself, we are an undergoverned country. We don't have the number or the percentage of civil servants required to provide public welfare services, but also in the current situation, in the current with the current trends of transfers and postings being politically directed, are we moving towards a spoils system rather than a permanent civil service moved on seniority? And the question of political embeddedness. Why is this important? Not only for the IS itself. It's important because we tend to see people, the people of India, and the constitution being the steel frame, not as equals, but perhaps as beneficiaries. And that's something that we should actually think about. Because if the civil service is to contribute to nation building, we need to see the people we work for and the people we work with as equals. And I'd love to have your thoughts about that.
Thank you, Uma. I'm just going to pick up 2 strains and then just add a little bit more on my own before I hand back to you, sir. Uma gave us a useful framework to think about the book, and I think that it sits well with the book. There's a phase about early career in Kerala. There's one that follows up with a diplomatic career in Brussels, and with a focus on the WTO. And that's a long section of the book, as you mentioned, but a very important section because it's the kind of detail and information that it's not commonly available. Certainly not available in everyday journalism. And there are not too many books about this kind of negotiating history and coalition building that's very important to global outcomes. And then there's a phase which is in the union government, first at the secretary level, and then subsequently as the cabinet secretary. And there's a lot of understatement there because you were there at very important moments, and maybe we can talk about any of those moments, and I'm sure everyone in the audience would be very interested in hearing about these things. And last, a post-retirement position back in Kerala and trying to think a little in a bigger frame about how government might look like. So that's a very useful frame. I want to also emphasize that I completely agree with what Uma said about the book not being about a big reveal. You know, that somehow the good reason to read the bureaucratic memoir is because they're going to tell you what no one else knows, and they're going to tell you something about what was happening inside the room in a way that is either salacious or even breaching of confidences, right? And that there's none of that in this book. And it still reads compellingly. And some of that has to do just with the quality of prose. And maybe you want to talk about that. Shorter sentences, clear prose, not common in the bureaucratic memoir. There's a lot of a lot of unnecessary hyperbole in so much of the writing, which is not there in this book, and that's striking and noteworthy generally, and certainly for all those who are going to pick up and read the book. But maybe we can start with a conversation about the Geneva years, and you mentioned that as a high point in your career. So you mentioned quite, with humility that you go there, but you don't really know trade law, and you're trying to figure out what are these GATT agreements, what's going on with TRIPS, what's going on with the upcoming treaties on negotiations on agriculture and investment, and you have no guide, right? And it's not like there's a prior officer or a standard book that you can go to. And I know it's an area I follow quite closely, that most developed countries come in with very strong negotiating teams, usually with academics on board, with law firms on board, very sophisticated departmental teams that specialize in each of these areas. And here you are thrown in as a IS officer who spent years in government, but not necessarily doing trade negotiation. So maybe you want to just share with the audience, what was that like, and what do you think got you through and allowed you to make the remarkable progress we made? And I think it's fair to say, I'm sure, again, you said people in the audience can have different views. It's fair to say that we have not done as well after that. And so it would be good to hear what made that possible.
So did you raise any point which you wanted me to answer? That is only about the book to be written, no? The book to be written. No, but I think that book has to be written by a number of people, because it cannot be done by one individual. When IAS is a very wide kind of spectrum, and each of us will have a different view. So I think you should also come in, and maybe we can have an edited book which will be useful. The other point is about Geneva. I mean, that is a very interesting part of my life. I was the Finance Secretary of Kerala in 1996. So I had established a reputation in the Commerce Ministry as chairman of the Spices Board. I went as chairman of the Cardamom Board, and then they decided to merge the Spices Export Promotion Council with the Cardamom Board. So that the exporters of spices didn't like it very much. The officers of the Spices Export Promotion Council also thought they will be downgraded, coming into a much larger organization. So that I managed. And as a Spices Board chairman, I established a reputation for presenting facts, for understanding facts, and learning everything, whatever is to be needed. So whoever talked to me, I had ready answers. So because my name was known in the Commerce Ministry, there was a position there called Joint Secretary Trade Policy Division. Now that typically dealt with multilateral trade negotiations. So I was picked up for that job, and that also is very interesting, because I was picked up for that job. Chidambaram was then the minister. Then Chidambaram asked a lot of people, whether I have integrity. He satisfied himself about my integrity before he took me. Then as soon as he sanctioned my deputation from Kerala to the Commerce Ministry, he lost his job. That was that Fairfax issue. He lost his job. Then we had another person from Bihar coming. I think his name was Chattopadhyaya or something. He came there, and he was there only for a month. On the day he left, my file he again cleared. You see, each time a minister changes, if an officer is to be appointed, the file has to go back to him. So if Chidambaram signs, his successor did not follow. But so he also signed it. Then he suddenly left also, 1.5 months. And then another minister called Bolli Ramayya from Karnataka came, from Andhra Pradesh came. Now he wanted to post some other officer there, but they said it is too late now. It has gone through a lot of process. So he also signed it. So I'm probably the first, probably the only man in the civil service whose appointment was approved by 3 ministers. No, nobody else like that. So I came to this job, trade policy. I knew nothing. You see, I didn't know what was national treatment. I didn't know what was most favored nation treatment. All these things you hear in the news, but you don't understand. So I knew nothing at all. So my predecessor had been there for 17 years. I said, I'm not able to make sense of it. So he said, don't worry about it. Each file that comes to you, you study in detail. Go into the depth, try to understand. That's the only way, there's no other way. There is a book called The Legal Texts, which contains all the agreements under the Uruguay round of the WTO. Any one of you can read it. You take it. It won't make any sense for you. So that is the Bible for the WTO, the diplomat. That is the Bible. So I didn't understand, and then fortunately, the only way in which I got some inkling of it, I was called to Missouri for a lecture in the academy. And then, you see, I searched around in the Missouri library. I found some very simple books on how the general agreement on tariffs and trade was drafted. That gave me an idea on how everything was hanging together. That's how I came into this. But then, you see, I did about 3 years of this. I was pretty good at it because it requires a lot of study of law. I went to one of his predecessors. There was no lawyer at that time. I got K.K. Krishnan Venugopal, who is K.K. Venugopal's son. I got him in and I made him study. He also didn't know. I made him study. And I said, then I went to NLSIU and said, please, we need some lawyers in India who can help us. Americans have lawyers. The European Union has lawyers. We have no lawyers. There's nobody there to advise me. So Krishnan studied, and he was the only lawyer we had at that point of time, Krishnan Venugopal. Then when I left this part of it, went to Brussels, where I was doing other work, mainly related to commerce, but other work. From there, I was suddenly posted as ambassador to the WTO. Now, here I was nervous because I had not negotiated as such. When you go to the WTO, you're constantly negotiating. I saw it after that. I went to the Doha Ministerial Conference. Okay, so when I had gone to the Doha Ministerial Conference, that is before I had joined the embassy, the mission in WTO, where, India was completely isolated. India had some supporters, Uganda, Pakistan, Nigeria, and so on, Ghana, the Dominican Republic, some supporters. The moment we went to Doha, these were the supporters which my predecessor, Ambassador Narayanan, had in Geneva. We went to the conference, all the ministers gave in immediately to the Europeans and the US. They completely collapsed. And India was fighting alone. And Murasoli Maran is a hell of a stubborn chap. He was very stubborn chap. Who wouldn't agree? They used to take him away, put him in a room with all just 4 or 5, the US trade representative, the European Trade Commissioner, the Director General of the WTO, just 3, 4 of them would try to persuade him, and we could hear from the other room, "You're trying to ambush me." He was saying that, but he never gave in. And to the end, he never gave in. Then the Europeans, they went out. Some of the European spokesmen, they said the developing countries are losing a great deal because there is a madman inside the building. But he remained that firm throughout. And by the time I went to Geneva, our reputation was zero. Nobody wanted to see us because the whole conference had been sort of dominated by this one man. Murasoli Maran was, of course, very highly respected. I've seen him in a couple of meetings thereafter. He would sit in his chair. The American trade representative would come and shake his hands. The European Commissioner, Trade Commissioner, would come to him to shake his hands. That was the way, because they were afraid of him. Then I went there, I had to rebuild the whole thing. I visited about 40 embassies, all the major embassies, including Pakistan and so on, made friends, got on first name terms with the ambassadors throughout, and then the discussion started. I was not very sure about myself because I hadn't discussed. Of course, one great thing that helped me was Kerala. You see, in Kerala, your whole career is one succession of negotiations with trade unions, with labor, with students. I mean, it's great. It's changed now. I remember once when I was collector and went to a college, Newman College in Todupuzha. I was hooted, huge hooting. But now, after my career, when I went as vice chairman, I found they were listening. They were listening and trying to understand. A change has taken place. So that was but once I started negotiating, it is much simpler than Kerala. In Kerala, you're outshouted. Here, you have a mic, and nobody speaks until you finished. And you had enough time to prepare, and prepare thoroughly, read books thoroughly. And some of them, and I managed to build alliances. My greatest contribution, I think, was in agriculture. You see, we had defensive interests in agriculture. India had defensive interests because of our many small farmers. The Australians, the Brazilians, the Americans, all of them, they wanted to export. We wanted to prevent import. So the European Union was like us. They also wanted to prevent import because their farmers they wanted to preserve. So I joined a huge gang, led by the European Union. The Brazilian ambassador came to me and said, "This was very disappointing. I had thought throughout this negotiation, we will be together." Then the American ambassador, she called me for lunch and she said, "We are very sorry about what you did." But then, you see, what happened was the US and the EU, they have the impression that whatever they do, finally they can get all developing countries to agree. That was the impression they had. And so, between them they agreed and they left us out in the cold. Then we started a new thing. the Brazilian ambassador came to me and said, let's start something. I said, we can start. Brazil has huge export interests and we had huge defensive interests. So we needed to build an agreement that combines both these things. And we did. And then the Egyptian ambassador was in her capital. The Thai ambassador was in her capital. The South African ambassador was in his capital. I called all of them. And they were able to get sanctions immediately. But the biggest thing of all was China. We had not joined with China till then. We were very good friends. And China respected us a lot because China respected Murasoli Maran. They had also come there as observers. They had just entered the WTO at that time. So they said, we'll come with you, whatever is India. What India says. So I went to the Chinese ambassadors. They have an office cum residence, huge thing, with their own cook imported from China. Beautiful food, lovely drinks. It was a beautiful place, and Chinese and table tennis tables where we played also. So I went there. You see, China generally takes a lot of time to take a decision. Now here I went and said, only Brazil and India were together at that time. I said, this is the Americans and the Europeans they've agreed among themselves and they will now impose it on us. We need to defend. And to my great surprise, the Chinese ambassador straight away said yes. The Brazilian ambassador came a little later. Then as we walked out of the Chinese ambassador's the office, he said, this is a coup. The China coming on our side. Then we had South Africa, Thailand, Egypt. Then we had the Brazilian ambassador called a meeting of the Latin American countries. They also agreed. So we formed a group. And this was a very powerful group. This was not the Uganda, Nigeria, Ghana kind of group, which will break. This didn't break. Throughout the meeting at Cancun in Mexico, this group held firm. And Indian news people, they can never believe that India will win anything. That ultimately we will have to give in. So they would come and ask me, are they breaking up? The Europeans are saying it is breaking up. I said, nothing is going to break. This is a strong group. One or two countries may go. El Salvador went out. But others will come in. But Indonesia came in. Pakistan came in. Pakistan, by that time, you see, Pakistan had a wonderful ambassador. They changed him and put somebody from the customs service there with the clear point that you just agree to what the US and the Americans say. So we managed to stop that. And there was another issue on they wanted to bring in new issues, competition policy, trade, investment, government procurement, trade facilitation into this, into the WTO regime, because WTO has a strong dispute settlement mechanism. It can impose penalties. And those penalties can be quite severe. So they wanted, these issues also brought into WTO, which we were resisting throughout. When I went there, I was resisting alone. Then after this episode, which he spoke about, when I had very good friendship with the African Union. I used to meet them frequently. We used to drink and eat together, have cigars together. That's different. But in this particular incident, you see what happened was Pascal Lamy, the trade commissioner of the EU, at a meeting of ministers at Sharm el-Sheikh. Later on, Arun Shourie told me that it was not Sharm el-Sheikh, it was Montreal. whether this happened. But anyway, he suddenly launched an attack on my colleague Amina Mohammed, who was the ambassador of Kenya. Her minister had gone roaming around somewhere in Montreal, so he was not there. And it was a meeting at which only ministers could speak. So Shauri turns to me and says, should I defend her? Then I turned to Amina. She was also sitting because Kenya and India were together in that meeting. She said, yes, please, if he can do it. I said, you write down a few points, give it to me. And I gave it to Shauri. Then Shauri went after the European Union. 20 minutes he launched a tirade using, extremely, I can't say abusive, but very strong words. He accused them of being pejorative in use of words against an ambassador, knowing that there is no minister to defend her, and knowing that she cannot speak. And then he didn't stop there. Next day morning, 20 minutes he spoke. Ministers were allowed only 5 minutes. The next day morning he comes back. And then he launches again another 20 minutes of attack on the European Union Trade Commissioner. And the Kenyan minister was also there. He didn't speak a word. But Murasuli Bharan, Arun Shori did this. And after that, the Africans were totally with India. They found that we are there to back them up even. It was not our case, it was theirs. But we backed them up. We had backed them up on the public health also, where we had huge fights with the United States. So after that, they came together and they said, we are behind India. And actually, at the final meeting in Cancun, the Africans said, no way we can bring in competition policy, no way we can bring in investment policy, investment issues into the WTO. We don't agree. And then the Mexican minister, who was the chairman of the meeting, to our great surprise, without further negotiation, he said the meeting is hereby terminated. And I learned later on that the Americans had known about it earlier, and they were already packing and putting their luggage into trucks. They came, we went with about, about 5 or 10 people. They came with about 250 for the meeting. And the Europeans came with 500. This is the size of the mismatch that was there. But we succeeded in that meeting, and later on, I myself tried to bring everybody together so that this negotiation could go on, because there are many things we needed to gain from it. And we gained, there was another July Framework Agreement, where we again brought everything together. Peter Zellick, who was then the US Trade Representative, he came to me and said, thank you for your role. So this is how we did the negotiation. It was very interesting, and I think I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I'm just going to step in because as a student of this field, what I can say is that that you're being modest, like your book, because while there's some space for belligerence in foreign policy, of which we have a lot on display by India in the recent past, belligerence doesn't count for much if it's not backed up by outcomes. And outcomes are negotiated in international fora based on interests. And the 65 pages that we are talking about showed precisely that interests matter, that alliances are sometimes temporary, they're interest-based, but what the complexity of that negotiation framework is. And the point being that we need to secure outcomes. And if you look at the Doha round in international trade negotiations, it would be India's high point by a long distance. And if we then ask, why have we forgotten? Why have we forgotten what we saw at Doha? Why is it that our diplomatic corps is unable to learn from the past and to adopt similar strategies in the future? That's a real signal question for us in the way we think about foreign affairs. But let me bring it home a little bit, and I know we are running out of time a little bit, and I want to bring the audience in, but I don't want to do that till I ask you to reflect on two parts of the book, which I think everyone in this room would be deeply interested in. 2611. Once again, your telling of that period of Indian history is very, the most you're going to get from this book is a complaint that the media went overboard. That's it. And otherwise, it's a very plain telling of what happened, how decisions were made, and the sequence of events as they unfolded, why a retaliation decision was, a decision not to retaliate was taken, and the thought process behind that. But I'm sure that you can bring some of that and more color to this audience, because I'm sure everyone is interested by that history of 2611. And the second was about the scams, the great scams of the 2G and the coal scam. And once again, what we get in the book is a counter argument that is an argument. It's not a diatribe. Some people might think that what that period of Indian history deserves is actually a very sharp rejoinder. That period deserves a retelling. The story of 2G, the story of Commonwealth Games, it deserves a second telling. And in a way, the book does that, at least to the discerning reader. If you read between the lines, it's there. But I'm curious in retrospect, because our public space, our public discourse is so vitiated on these questions that it requires sober and strong intervention. You do that, but I'll let you say it in your own words. These two things, I think, are epochal events that everyone in the audience would be interested to hear.
I just wanted to say, and again, I found this so compelling, that when you're actually talking about the 2611 attack and the question of retaliation, you start off by actually saying that decision was above my pay grade.
Yes.
And I just found that so appealing and compelling that's a sign of modesty and also a sign of restraint. But yes, like Sudhir said, we would like to hear from you.
Okay, 2611, I just think I'll tell you the story. Around 5 o'clock, 5:30, I got a call from the Home Secretary at that time, Madhukar Gupta. He was in Pakistan, our Home Secretary. He was supposed to have come that morning, but he didn't turn up because he said he needs one more day's discussion. I said, okay, you can stay for one more day. I would have expected these fellows would land up here. So 5 o'clock, I get a call. I don't recall whether it was from the Home Ministry that some problems have started in Mumbai. Now, that was a time when we had a series of such explosions, You had it in Delhi, you had it in Varanasi, you had it in Ahmedabad. Number of places, these explosions, explosive devices were planted and they exploded, including in Sarojini Market near my house. I was staying in Satyamarg at that time, and I was walking to Satyamarg when my daughter, who's sitting there, telephones me and says, where are you now? And I said, I'm walking towards Sarojini Market. Then she said, you go back immediately. Then I looked at Sarojini Market and I found huge pall of smoke on top. So I didn't go. I might have reached there if I had if my dog had cooperated. My dog wanted a walk before going to Sarojini Market, before my going to Sarojini Market, which is probably, I mean, I don't know whether I would have been at the spot where the explosion took place, but I might have been also, who knows. So 26/11 at 5 o'clock, I get this call. Then I rang up the chief secretary. So the chief secretary said, this is the same kind of thing that you have seen in those other places. I said, do you want any help from here now? He said, no, not immediately. We are okay. Because we cannot, the central government cannot go to a state with our forces without the state government asking for it. Law and order is a state subject. So he said, it's okay, I think we'll handle it. Then I immediately informed the members of the Security Cabinet Committee on Security, the Prime Minister, the Home Minister, the Defense Minister, the External Affairs Minister. I told them that this has happened. The state seems to be confident about solving it. About 1 hour later, he rings me up and says, we are not able to completely handle it. It looks like gang warfare. That is what he said, gang warfare. And we want the Marcos. The Marcos were the Marine Commandos. So I rang up, this was around 7:38 or so, I rang up the naval chief. The naval chief had not heard of it. Unless you're watching TV, you would not know. But he said, immediately I will send the Marcos. I also rang up the general, the chief of army staff, who wasn't there. I think he had gone for dinner or something. So, meanwhile, I also told the National Security Guard, be in readiness. We haven't got a call yet from the state government, but be in readiness, keep your team ready. Now, that team, ultimately around 11:30, 12, the chief secretary telephoned and said, we need support. I said, I will send the NSG immediately. You please ensure logistics for taking them from the airport to wherever you want. Meanwhile, the Home Minister, Shivraj Patil, at that time, he said, I also want to go. So he also went with that team. Immediately, Shivraj Patil took J.K. Dutt, who was the chief of the NSJ, to the governor's house for a meeting. All the others went to the various locations where these things were being held. So throughout the evening, we had absolutely no idea as to what was happening. This kind of thing about 10 people coming in, it was not known to us, at least to me. You see, in Delhi, the practice was confused. All the confidential information about security will be passed on to the National Security Advisor and the Home Minister. It will not be passed on to the Cabinet Secretary. The Cabinet Secretary looks after the administration, but when the crisis comes, it gets loaded onto the Cabinet Secretary. So without knowing the background, I had to deal with it, not knowing what was happening. Later on, it came out that number of signals had come from various places, that there was a boat coming, that something serious is happening. We had that chap, Headley also, who visited us many, many times. We should have had records. Why is this fellow coming so frequently? We didn't have that. So we had to act on the spur of the moment without enough information on our side. And probably it could have been dealt with much better if all the information had been available at one point And that one point should have known at that point of time that this is what is likely to happen. That didn't happen. So this, it was a mess. That is what, after that, I held a number of meetings and we tried to strengthen security along the coastline. Today it will be far better. It will be far more difficult. But India is a very porous border. You can get people even now coming. But then the NSG managed. We lost 2 lives, but they managed. And what I mentioned about the press was that, you see, the way they were covering the incident. One lady went and there was a body lying there. She went and opened the cover, the sheet, to show that close. And everything, the helicopters landing, everything was being photographed. Now, what would be the effect on... Then I got the Chief Secretary to impose Section 144 and then have them taken out of the place, a little further away. But the kind of message they were giving all the time, it was so terribly negative that it caused a lot of damage throughout the country. So immediately thereafter, we did a lot of management after that, with the Navy, with the Coast Guard, with the state governments. We got together and we did a lot of things. But this was certainly not an issue of which the government of India should be proud. That is one thing. But again, 2 days later, after this event, was the Delhi election, assembly election. And I thought that the incident had taken place, the Congress government would be decimated. But no, they won. So the people were obviously thinking that we had done a good job. We had sorted it out. And later, when the national elections were held, 2009, all the seats in Mumbai were captured by the Congress. So what the people perceived of it was a bit different from what we, sitting there, perceived. And I must also say that I kept the Prime Minister awake till 2 o'clock in the morning. Because I needed to brief him. I needed his support. Then what was the second question?
I was just going to ask you to reflect on the scams controversies, the
scams,
CAG reports.
You see, the scams, I think, were now, of course, the court has already, they sat over the 2G scam for 7 years. Listened, looked at thousands of pages, looked at about 7,000 witnesses they questioned. And finally, the court came to the conclusion that there is no, all the accused were acquitted. The point is, you see, in my view, the CAG has a very responsible constitutional position. He is not there to exaggerate issues and go to the press. He is much more than that. He is a constitutional authority like the President of India. Now, the way he exaggerated the figures, the press picked up only the worst figures. He gave 2 or 3 different figures. I myself had looked at it and I said that we will lose so much. But the whole issue of the 2G scam was, 2G scam as they call it, is that the government in 1999 earlier, they had already decided that the important point that we have to do is to provide services to the consumer at a low price. And the same system was followed. There was no deviation from that system. The Telecom Regulatory Authority of India had said, don't change the system. Because if you change the system, there will be two different sets of service providers with two different sets of practices. When you go to 3G, you introduce auctions. So this was picked up by a couple of justices who, in the Supreme Court, who made a big song and dance out of it. And that's how the scam thing. Then came the politicians, then came Anna Hazare, then came Acharya Ramdev, all of them came. So that was really, I think it was, and coal also. Coal, I was not there at that time. My successor was there, but coal, there is a book by Anil Swarup, who's written a good book. And Anil Swarup has written very clearly in that the whole calculation was wrong. You see, in so far as coal is concerned, the cost will vary depending on the stripping ratio, depending on the logistics, depending on the movement involved. You cannot have a single value. Instead, he took a single value from the Coal India figures and then multiplied it by the entire reserves of the country to get a figure of 180,000 crore loss. I mean, there's obviously a huge exaggeration. So I couldn't say it, as he mentioned, as strongly, because Vinod Rai was my cadre and a very good friend, continues to be a good friend. So that I had to, I held myself back a little bit. So far as Commonwealth Secretariat Games was concerned, there was corruption. And that corruption came from one individual and his henchmen. And I mentioned that also. That was a Suresh Kalmadi. And why he was appointed, nobody knows. Because the decision taken was that the Sunil Dutt, who was then the sports minister, was completely against it. But somehow the instruction came that he will be made the chairman of the organizing committee. So there was corruption there. But the whole point is, I don't mind corruption if the thing gets done. It didn't get done. Finally, they had to pass it on to me. And I had 1.5 months, continuous rain in Delhi. Continuous rain. I had to somehow see that all the stadia were ready. And I tell you, the happiest moment I had was when my wife and I were driving towards the Nehru Stadium where the opening ceremony was held. I saw these new buses with the athletes going there. It gave me a lump in my throat. Because I had felt that this is failing. And I had told the NSA, I had told the Principal Secretary to Chief Minister that I will resign if this doesn't go through. Something has been entrusted to me. It's not worked. I'm out. But and then the opening ceremony is so fantastic that all over the world we got. And we got more than 100 gold medals in that games. All of them played well. It went like clockwork. That was the only time in my life when I met Rahul Gandhi. My wife and I went to the lobby attached to the main pavilion, and he was also sitting there. There were a lot of eatables there. So he was also sitting there. I introduced myself. And then he said, "Are you feeling better now?" And I said, "Not yet. It's still another 15 days to go." So that's the only time I met him.
You have been listening to BIC Talks by Bangalore International Centre. If you like what you heard, do follow us on social media. Keep up with our programming by signing up for our mailer on the website or leave us a review or rating on Apple Podcasts or iTunes. The crew that makes these podcasts possible is Gaurav Krishna and Ishan Gupta on sound supervision and production, with support from S. Sarunaraj and Raghu Tenkaila. Artwork is designed by Chandni Venkataraman of Criss Cross Design Studio. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel on your favorite podcast platform. It can also be accessed on our website, bangaloreinternationalcentre.org. This is Lekha Naidu signing off on behalf of everyone at BIC.